Welcome to episode 15 of Ship of the Week. Yachts and the wealthy and powerful are nearly synonymous, and while this has been true for hundreds of years, only recently did such vessels rapidly advance in size. The early 20th century saw such privately owned pleasure vessels remain fairly modest in scale, and a typical example is Sequoia, a little ship that boasts a career deeply woven into the fabric of modern American history that granted her the nickname the Floating White House. The pomp and circumstance would come, but first, Sequoia was launched by John H. Mathis Shipbuilding at Camden, New Jersey in October of 1925. Originally bearing the name Sequoia II, the ship was ordered for Emily and Richard Cadwallader, a banking family from Philadelphia. As a side note, Mrs. Cadwallader's grandfather, John Roebling, and aunt and uncle Emily and Washington Roebling were responsible for the design and construction of New York City's Brooklyn Bridge. Sequoia is 104 feet long, with a beam slightly over 18 feet, displaces about 90 tons, and is capable of making roughly 12 knots. She was not in service with the Cadwalladers for particularly long, passing through another pair of private hands before the Great Depression led to her acquisition by the United States. In 1931, the U.S. Commerce Department's Bureau of Navigation took control of the ship, which operated her as a trap for entities buying and selling what was then illegal alcohol, as they would board her expecting a wealthy family in need of replenishing their hold full of liquor, and instead find federal agents ready to pounce. Sequoia caught the attention of U.S. President Herbert Hoover around that time, who had a few years prior decommissioned and sold the presidential yacht Mayflower, and was searching for a suitable replacement for her. The yacht's acquisition for presidential service was controversial due to its timing. The Great Depression continued to worsen, in stark contrast to Hoover's decadent pleasure voyages aboard Sequoia. Perhaps for public relations reasons, Hoover's excursions were relatively few and far between. Sequoia began to serve more of an active role in the affairs of state under President Franklin Roosevelt, who would regularly use the Salon for meetings, and had her transferred to the Navy and given the USS designation. Roosevelt sailed from Washington to Mount Vernon with then British Prime Minister James MacDonald aboard in 1933 amid growing unease in Europe. First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt is depicted here, sitting on the deck above the pilot house. To avoid a potential catastrophe should the wooden ship come under attack during wartime, USS Potomac became the presidential yacht following the outbreak of the Second World War, aboard which the King and Queen of Britain and the President and First Lady are seen here in 1939. Sequoia was the personal yacht of the U.S. Secretary of the Navy for the duration of the war and for some time afterward, although presidents often conducted business aboard her as well. President Harry Truman met with the British and Canadian Prime Ministers Clement Attlee and Mackenzie King during the nuclear arms discussions in late 1945, and President Eisenhower frequently met aboard the ship while a general, NATO commander, and later President of the United States. The Kennedys frequently used the ship, and John Kennedy is seen here opening gifts in the ship's salon with friends and family in May of 1963, but it is unclear the extent to which the president conducted business aboard the ship, and much of the details of such activities are lost, to the delight and frustration of conspiracy theorists everywhere. Following the president's assassination, the former First Lady Jackie Kennedy met with friends aboard the ship, likely due to the ease with which Sequoia could avoid the press. While the Kennedys used Sequoia more as a yacht than an office, President Lyndon Johnson used the ship more frequently for official business and visiting dignitaries, as the quagmire in Vietnam continued. President Nixon spent by far the most time aboard Sequoia, hosting a summit with Soviet General Secretary Brezhnev in June of 1973 that took place partly aboard the ship. The First Lady is seen here giving a tour of the yacht to a group of disadvantaged students, and it was aboard Sequoia that the president made his decision to be the only U.S. president yet to resign the office. President Gerald Ford, as seen here, hosted cabinet meetings aboard the ship, as well as visiting heads of state to include the Japanese emperor. Rather uniquely, first daughter Susan Ford had her high school prom group. They hosted a party on board the ship in 1975. Upon assuming the office, President Carter balked at her nearly $1 million annual operational costs and ordered the ship to be auctioned, and a veritable parade of private owners followed, as various nonprofits and conservancies deliberated what to do with the ship. Then Vice President George H.W. Bush and President Clinton visited her during this transitional period at various points, and she became a National Historic Landmark in 1988, opening up the possibility of a more permanent heritage role for the storied yacht. Although she changed hands multiple times during the first few years of the 21st century, and the Mystic Seaport Museum in Connecticut failed to secure her purchase, preparations for a much more extensive restoration effort and return to Washington are currently underway.